Good afternoon and welcome to our Ivors Academy Youth Network Presents webinar event. This is the second in our Creators Conversation series. Many of us will of course know our guest from his Saturday afternoon radio show, Cultural Bunker for Scala Radio. He's remarkable in many ways, not at least because he has the accolade of being the UK's youngest ever national radio presenter. Our host for this afternoon is a composer who's worked extensively in the world of opera and dance, as well as the usual orchestral world, who is a conductor, an academic, an instrumentalist, all to name just but a few. They have worked together before, and it's wonderful to be able to bring them together again this afternoon. I'm delighted to welcome our guests, broadcaster, composer, pianist, educator, classical music champion, Jack Pepper, and our host for this afternoon, the no less eminent Dr. Shirley Thompson OBE. Welcome, guys.
Thank you very much, Wesley.
Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome.
And welcome to the dynamic Jack this afternoon. I've had the pleasure of being interviewed by you before for the Culture Bunker, which I thoroughly enjoyed coming to Scala Radio and speaking to you about my work. And it's such a pleasure and an honor to have this reversed and to be now speaking to you about your work.
Well, thank you. The pleasure's mine, Shirley. It's nice to have the seats changed. And I always feel when we do an interview, you're still having a conversation when you're walking out the building. So it's nice to be able to sort of pick up and continue the chat. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, guys, before the conversation starts for proper, I'll just like to let our audience know that we'll be having a Q&A session towards the end of our afternoon. So I would encourage all of you who are watching and listening to send in your questions for Jack and for Shirley now via the chat function or the Q&A at the end of your webinar screens. Now, Shirley, Dr. Shirley Thompson, I'll hand over the conversation to you.
Okay, Wesley, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And back to Jack. So Jack, it's great to have you join us here today at the Ivors Academy. And we'd like to know a bit about your beginnings in music to get some insight into how you started and why, possibly. So what was the inspiration for you starting as, first of all, a pianist?
Well, I mean, it probably won't surprise you, Shirley, having met me, that I'm quite noisy. And as a child, I was always banging drums, always tapping rhythms and always singing. And I remember, hearing a theme songs for film, for example, James Bond films in particular, hearing the theme song and wanting to sing them back. And it honestly started as imitation. I was trying to copy what I heard and the way it made me feel. So, certain Bond themes I was listening to and I was thinking, well, why does it make me feel a certain way? Why does it paint that picture of that particular character or that movie? And so I honestly just wanted to be able to replicate how it made me feel. And I went to a Church of England infant school where we all sang hymns. And so I was singing before I was playing the piano quite a bit. And because we were accompanied on the keyboard by one of the teachers, that was why it was the piano that I was really drawn to, because I remember watching that teacher thinking, I really want to be able to do that. So it was very seeing somebody else doing it and thinking, I want to do the same.
Fabulous. So was it through music education at school that you became interested in music?
I would say it was important in terms of the fact we were singing every day and the fact that I could see teachers. One of my teachers brought in an acoustic guitar and he just did it as a hobby, but he would often play in lessons. So I was surrounded by music in that sense. It was very much normalised. It wasn't like, for 5 minutes of the academic year, I had a music lesson to kind of tick a box. I was able to see it in, I suppose, different aspects of school life, like assemblies and, science lessons and so on, because the teacher just happened to love music. But, my family, there aren't professional musicians in my family. But they're music lovers and diverse music lovers. So in terms of the music I was listening to, it wasn't one style, it wasn't one genre. And there was nobody telling me, you can't do that or you can't be that, because I've been very lucky to have great support from people and from musicians I've contacted when I was starting out. But in terms of the home and at school, it was very much a, well, try it and see if it works. If you want to play something that way, or you want to write something that way, well, try and see where it leads. So it was very free in that sense.
Interesting. So did you have a piano at home? Did your parents already have a piano in the house, or did you have to search for one?
No, we had to search for one. So actually, you can sort of see I've upgraded. So that Yamaha clavinet is what I started on. And after a few years, you know, I remember, I think I was trying to play Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue on the clavinova. It's, you know, maybe a little bit of an adventure. It's, you know, it uses the whole piano, and let's just put it this way, some of the keys now don't work in quite the way that they used to. I think it's, you know, it's got its life, hasn't it? And so I started on that electric piano, which served me until I was probably about 15. I started playing the piano at 7, and then at 15, 16, I changed piano teacher. And, you know, he was incredibly kind. He didn't really charge me for lessons. He was just very keen to sort of, you know, encourage me. And, you know, I'm very grateful to that. And he helped us find this wonderful piano that's behind me. I mean, I would not have it sat behind me if I didn't have that teacher who, you know, it was generosity in terms of thinking, you know, you're interested in this area, let's develop it and see where it goes. But I started on the clavinova, and I'm very grateful for it.
Isn't it interesting that it's somebody that can really inspire you to do something? Because you mentioned this teacher that didn't charge you. That person invested his or her time in you to push you forward. And I've found that through my career, it's always been 1 or 2 people that has invested, you know, with no obligation, just invested their time and their effort and their energy to take me along the way.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why I've been sort of really keen to champion music education. It's true that there's quite a lot of luck involved in it, in terms of, you know, so this teacher who basically gave me lessons virtually for free, he was a neighbour, and he'd retired from a top school. And I remember just walking the dog past him when I was sort of 12, 13, and we'd just say hello and have a chat. You know, they're very sort of functional, like, what have you been up to today, and hope you're all well. And neither of us kind of knew too much about what the other did. And we got talking one day, and it was purely by chance that he lived down my road that I was then able to, you know, I wouldn't have met him otherwise. It's not that at that point I was going to lots of events, or, you know, I wasn't in London that much, going to even many live concerts. So it was the luck, really, of living on that road and meeting that person. I was able to then sort of have that platform to go forward.
Yes, but some might say that there is no, this kind of synchronicity is meant to happen. So I might say, and I believe that to a large extent, that somehow the stars come together and, you know, we get that combustion. So
well, I think, yeah, you do have to sort of lay the groundwork, and definitely in terms of radio, you know, I don't have any broadcasters or people who work in the media in my family. It was purely because I listened a lot to the radio, and I went to a concert at the South Bank Centre, and saw the head of one of the radio stations, and I went over and said hello, and I was probably 16, 17 years old. And it was purely, you know, yes, I knew that person's face because I, you know, read about them and read about their station and listened to a lot of music. But, you know, in that sense, there's a bit of luck because I happen to be in the same room as that person. But then you do also have to then go, I'm going to go over and say hello. So it's maybe a little bit of both.
Absolutely. So how influential has the watching of films and knowing the film genres, how influential have these been on you in your music making?
Well, it's funny, I've got a lot of friends who are really interested in becoming a film composer, and whilst, like, I don't think any path is set, and I'm always open to different routes, and, you know, you've got to be open as you go, haven't you? You can't plot everything, but I've never been drawn to film composition in the way that maybe I've been drawn to theatre. And I think I've been thinking a lot about why. And, you know, theatre is immensely collaborative with the cast as well, and every step of the way, and you might write certain songs for a specific singer and a specific role, whereas in film, and you know, I don't have the experience that you have, Shirley, so you can sort of fill us in on that. But I get the impression that with film composition, it's, you know, you're not going to be collaborating with Brad Pitt, are you? If you're scoring a Brad Pitt motion picture, you'll probably be able to speak with the actors and actresses and say, well, what about if we try it this way? And I like the fact that you can constantly tweak in the theatre world. And so the film music was massively inspiring to me in terms of showing how you can tell a story through a piece of music. And, you know, the more I listen to classical music and sort of concert music, the more I feel that most of these pieces, consciously or not, are probably telling a story. So they're kind of different sides to the same coin. So in terms of storytelling in music, very important. But I think it was also just use of the orchestra, you know, like John Barry's writing in particular, and just hearing instruments that, you know, I'd never heard live before. And I think when you're, you know, growing up, and particularly when you're sort of, you know, I was probably 6 or 7 years old, that was when I started writing, when I started playing the piano. That's a really important age, I think, to just be exposed to loads of sounds and loads of ideas, because that kind of becomes your normal. You know, what you experience when you're 6, 7, 8, 9 is what you take forward with you, I think. And then anything that you come across, some of the things I've come across, I mean, I say it sounds a bit ridiculous, but sort of 17, 18, 19 years old, I come across some things I go, oh, well, I haven't heard that before. I'm just a little bit more sceptical, and it's a slippery slope, isn't it? You know, you want to be open-minded as much as you can, and, you know, when you're 6 or 7, you don't listen to something and go, well, that's a bit random, I've never heard that before, because you just don't have the context, you haven't heard as much. So it was a very good age for me to be exposed to different instruments and different ways of telling a story through music.
Through music, terrific. So when you were at school, were you in any school bands or choirs, or what was your experience like?
Well, I accompanied the school choir, because when I was at infant school and we were singing these hymns, I set myself the goal of becoming the accompanist for those hymns. So I always saw this teacher, and I always thought, I want to be doing that. And I just went up to this teacher after one of the assemblies and said, you know, this was my kind of introduction to, you know, music lessons, really informally. I just said, could you show me a little bit about how to read music and how to play the piano? So it was, again, very informal. And, you know, you just have to go up and ask and sort of make your interest known to somebody. And people are really
incredible,
generous. And yeah, this teacher sort of showed me a little bit of the sort of, you know, music notation and what notes what. And by sort of year 6, I was lucky enough to be accompanying the hymns. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it went very wrong on many occasions, but that was a great education.
Yes.
You know, however many people singing, and you have to try and keep people in time and follow them, but also lead them. You know, it was a really good introduction.
Yeah, what a great way to learn musicianship on the inside.
And I am a believer in that, but I think you kind of have to do it. And you know, the real world is as valuable, if not more valuable, in education, because you're sort of, it's a real life application of what you learn about in the classroom. And, you know, ideally there's kind of a balance between the two.
Yeah.
You have to know the rules to break the rules. But I do think that real life experience is an education in itself, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I do get the impression that 200, 300, 400 years ago, being composed was much more a real life expression, in that you were a tradesperson. You know, you needed to write that cantata by Sunday. You needed to complete that symphony for a particular occasion. And I think we've lost a bit of that. We've lost a bit of that edge in a way. And I think we've lost a bit of that link with real life experiences. But I think that's coming back with people like yourself. And in that context, who would you say, what composers have most influenced you in your music?
Well, it's multitaskers, to be honest with you. People who do lots of different things. And it's interesting you say that about the sort of the the role of a composer and the way it's viewed as well. And, you know, it's not an ivory tower. You know, Vaughan Williams is a great example of somebody who said that, you know, basically it doesn't matter whether it's a music hall song or a folk song, we need music that expresses something about our community and that's something to them. And, you know, music is a way of talking with somebody, isn't it? And
Absolutely.
I for one, don't like to feel like I'm sitting in a room talking to myself. And that's why I love radio, because it's another way of having a conversation. And, you know, I definitely feel that composers who have been great communicators, whether that's through their music or through their writing or broadcasting, so people like Leonard Bernstein, for example, you know, I know, and it's interesting the point you just made, Shirley, as well, that people criticise Bernstein for doing too much. They say, oh, you know, he was such a conductor. He only wrote something like 4 significant pieces of music through the 1970s. You know, his output was fairly small when he was, you know, with the New York Philharmonic and touring the world with orchestras. So in terms of time, yes, multitasking can be, you know, it makes inroads on your composing for sure. But I think the whole point that I got involved with music was because I wanted to speak to people. I wanted to say something about my feelings or express something about theirs and kind of come to understand, it sounds really fluffy, but you come to understand people better that way. And so composers who have managed to do that, people like Bernstein, Vaughan Williams, who are very much, you know, writing in their distinctive voice, but also not afraid of the public and not afraid of melody and not afraid of being hummed and whistled in the street. I think those are the kind of composers who have really inspired me.
Yes, great to hear, and that shows in your work. So tell me a bit about these huge commissions that you've had. You had the one to celebrate classical music, classic FM. How did that come about, and what were the thought processes in creating such a celebratory piece?
Well, that was fun. That was fun. So I often like to kind of, particularly the instrumental, it's interesting. With songwriting, I feel like the first thing you tend to write, if you just say, I'm going to write a song right now, tends to be quite melancholy and quite self-pitying. Whereas I find the opposite with instrumental music. If you say, write a piece for brass right now, or write a string quartet, I tend to go towards the upbeat and the jovial. And that piece of music, yeah, that was for Classic FM's 25th birthday. And they commissioned a handful of composers who were no older than the station itself. And, you know, I would say one of the great things about that experience, not only the fact that we were treated as actual composers, which sounds really weird. You're a teenager, people always go, oh, you're a young composer, or you're an aspiring composer. And that word is so loaded, because at what point do you stop becoming an aspiring something? And at what point do you then become, well, you're writing music, yes. Is it being heard? Yes. You're a composer. And I think that was one of my first experiences of being treated as an equal, which is, you know, we don't talk about age so much when it comes to sort of access to, you know, when it's competitions and so on. And it goes to the other end of the scale as well. You know, I've gone to sort of seminars and things where you've met a 75-year-old who's retired from, say, finance, and they love music, and they're only now starting to compose. So I don't just mean young people here, but that opportunity was a real eye-opener for me, because I no longer felt like I was this weird little kid who sat and wrote music and who was constantly aspiring for something. You know, you were treated as an equal. But yes, there were probably 5 or 6 of us who were 25 or under. We were all invited into their studios, which you can imagine, I was 16, 17 years old. To go to a radio studio and see faces that you recognise, and, you know, to then also know that your work's going to be heard, because you can write for years pieces of music that sit on a shelf, and there's nothing that's sort of more dejecting than writing music that only you know. So it was great to know that you're not only going to be able to meet other like-minded young composers, you're not only going to be treated as a composer rather than as a young composer, but also you're going to be able to get your work heard, you're going to have it recorded so you can share it with people, which is another really important thing. It's basically a musician's CV, isn't it? You have to share your music with people. So yeah, that was, I wrote a fanfare for this brass group, But because it was a celebration of a radio station, I really wanted to build loads of quotations into the piece. So I quoted like Brahms' Hungarian Dance No. 5.
One of your favourite pieces.
Sort of famous classical masterpieces that were thrown in, as well as the radio station's jingle. So there was a central section, and Happy Birthday to You, naturally.
Oh my word.
It all sort of mixed together, and it's sort of almost like it was so excited it sort of fell over itself with joy. And it was a, you know, it was a celebration piece.
It's a celebration.
But it was, I remember, because it was played at the Barbican first off by a brass quintet. And I remember when I sat in the stalls and it was being performed, people were laughing when it was played. And I was really pleased with that, because that's exactly what I wanted. You know, I don't want people to sit there motionless and sort of, you know, not portraying any kind of emotion, because music's meant to make you feel something. And the fact that when that little like sly reference to Happy Birthday came in, and little sort of snatches of different famous tunes came in, you know, it was meant to make people smile. It was a birthday piece. So I was really pleased to hear that reaction.
Yes.
And it was great fun, and you know, I've been very lucky to have those kind of encouragements, really, because through that I was able to meet other young composers and broadcasters. So that was a fantastic platform.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that technique you use of employing iconic melodies and sounds to include people and to connect. And it's something that I use for my symphony when I for each movement, I included a really iconic melody that everybody in the world could relate to. And I think, as well, for me as a composer, it's important to somehow link and be inclusive, use an inclusive language. And I just want to ask you, do you feel that composing is an ivory tower activity in 2020?
I think it is less so now. And again, you know, it'd be interesting to hear your experiences as well, Shirley, because I felt intimidated when I started. I felt like I had to write a certain way, I had to sound a certain way. And I think there's still, it's a little controversial, but I still think there's a slight fear of popularity and melody. So, you know, if an orchestra is performing in a wide open space and there are members of the public walking in and walking out, and there are several orchestras that do this, and I think it's a fantastic idea, you know, bring the music out to familiar spaces, not just in the concert hall. But they haven't played familiar pieces of music that the public would associate them with. So, you know, I feel that, you know, I have huge respect for the London Symphony Orchestra and all that they do. And, you know, they do their Trafalgar Square BMW Plastics concerts every summer, where they have an open air stage in Trafalgar Square. And, you know, there's always a new commission and there's a symphony, so there's a nice balance there. But I think there could be one extra thing that's added, which is like you know, the Star Wars theme, which the London Symphony Orchestra recorded. I personally wouldn't find that populist or a sellout or anything. And all these words are not helpful at all. I think there is still a culture of, yes, we have amazing symphony orchestras performing amazing film music, but it tends to be in a film music concert. You hear, you know, John Williams' piece, for example, played alongside Elgar, played alongside Strauss, for example. It tends to be the film composition concert at the Albert Hall, and everything we're going to play is film music. And I feel that actually they enrich one another. You know, you find points of connection as well as differences between music when you play it side by side. So I still think we have a long way to go when it comes to breaking down these boxes. No music is written in a box. The label is slapped on long after it's been written. And you know, I think whilst those labels are there to help us, sometimes they actually really restrain us. And music, of all things, is not there to be restrained. It's there to sort of be free. So I think it's a lot more open. There are a lot of composers writing in lots of different styles. I think that's really exciting. Crossover of genres, you know, which has always been a thing, really. Jazz has always, you know, it was inspiring classical music a century ago. It's not new, but I I think you're no longer looked down on so much for embracing all those different styles really clearly. But I do still think we have a way to go in breaking down those boxes and labels.
Yeah, very interesting that you say that. And good to hear that you do think that these labels and these boxes are disintegrating, and yeah, probably about time. And in terms of I remember reading somewhere that your Desert Island disc would be the Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue, for example. Can you tell me why that would be? And maybe, do you think that's considered the kind of piece that would be purely classical, or do you think it would be put in a particular box?
Well, all pieces of music are like sponges. They draw on other pieces of music, and they draw on lots of different influences, consciously or otherwise, that composer's been exposed to in their life and the people they've met and so on. And Gershwin, Rhapsody in Blue, I understand why some people might go, well, maybe it's like more jazz, or maybe it's not like a traditional piano concerto in a sense, but it's called a rhapsody. It's supposed to be free flowing. It's supposed to go on tangents, and that's exactly what it does. And I love that sense of, I almost feel like, Gershwin, he famously composed at the piano and would just improvise and just see what took his fancy. And it seems at first like quite an unorthodox, maybe slightly haphazard way of composing, to just sit at the piano and see what happens. But I love the idea that he could play a chord, and he'd often improvise at parties surrounded by friends late into the evening. I love that idea that he could try something out with his friends around him, play a chord and go, "Ooh, I like that sound. Let's try that." And there's not an abandon, but there's a freedom to it, that he can write what he feels expresses that piece and that idea. And I think that most music is drawing on something away from itself, away from that particular box. Whether it's like Schubert writing a song, drawing on a famous poet. I mean, that is drawing influence from somebody else's work. And I don't think those labels are always very helpful, because I think that this music is always a bit of a mirror held up to something else, and it's somebody responding to something they've heard or something they've seen. I don't think there is such a thing as a standalone piece. I mean, the term crossover, what even is crossover? Because Shirley, you've written a symphony where you've got old drummers, you've got a drum kit, you've got singers, you've got a symphony orchestra, but it's still a symphony. And then actually the question becomes, well, what's a symphony? What is an ensemble? Well, the answer is it's another label, isn't it? And
yes.
When you wrote that piece, New Nation Rising, did you think what is a symphony? What have other people written, or did you write what you wanted to write for that specific occasion? Because that was for the Jubilee, wasn't it?
Yeah. You've got your interviewer's hat on.
Sorry, I was going to say, it's like mind games.
But I think it's interesting to draw the parallel, because I'm asked that all the time about pushing boundaries, which I think you're doing as well. And I think, in the 2020, it's incumbent upon us to represent what's around us. And I don't want to be writing as Beethoven was doing, and I think he'd be very surprised if I was writing in a style that he was writing in the 19th century. So I use materials, musical material that's around me, the orchestral, popular world, and so on. And I find that you do something comparable. But I think the symphony is what you make it. I think the forms that we have are what we make it. If I decide that this is going to be an opera, then that's what an opera is. If I decide that this 5-movement, 5-section orchestral piece is going to be a symphony, that's what it is for me. And I think we have that liberty now, and that option to make things what we want them to be.
Yeah, and in some senses that's been happening for centuries,
I
because
think
in
so.
the 1700s, the symphony's 3 movements, then suddenly it's 4 movements, then it's 5, then it's 1, and literally that isn't even like the last 50 years. That was in the 1800s. You were suddenly Beethoven, the Pastoral Symphony, you're suddenly adding movements, taking movements away, making them longer, shorter, adding different instruments that you'd never expect. It's always evolving, isn't it? It's a bit like a language. You know, add words to our language, and it develops as it goes, because it reflects the people that are writing it. And so you don't like the phrase "make it your own," but you kind of can't help it, can you? Because it is your own.
That's right. Yes, and we're adding to it. We're innovating all the time, and I think that's what we need to do to innovate. You know, in many ways, not only in the musical language, but also the form and other aspects. Yes. So, what would you say has been your defining piece that you would use as a sort of prototype to go forward with, Jack?
It would actually be a song that nobody's heard. It's funny. There are so many pieces. It's deceptive, isn't it? Because there are so many pieces that we write that, I don't know if you're the same, Shirley, but nobody will ever hear. Nobody will ever hear probably like 75, 80% of what I've written. But I'm kind of okay with that, because that has helped inspire what you have heard. And some of the people I most admire, and a lot of the music I listen to at the moment, there's a lot of Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, Jerome Kern, sort of 1920s Broadway songwriters.
Yes.
And again, they drew on loads of different influences. And one of the things I've learned from listening to them and reading about them, somebody like Irving Berlin, for example, who wrote White Christmas and God Bless America, he would write a song every single day, but he said that I've written more failures than any other songwriter I know, because I've written more songs than any other songwriter I know. And it's still, I've sort of dabbled in pop songwriting and collaborating with some other pop songwriters.
Have you?
It's one of the things that I sort of become aware of is there is an acceptance of having to write a lot, and not all of it will necessarily hit the mark. You might write a piece that you think, I keep coming back to it and I keep revising it, it's still not where I need to be. But the things you're learning with that piece are really important for, the time that you write something in an hour, or you write really easily. So you kind of need those difficult writing experiences to sort of make the other pieces that people do here. But I wrote a song when I was about 14. It was inspired by the refugee crisis, actually. I remember watching the news and seeing life rafts going to the Mediterranean, and those horrendous images. And a lot of the things I've written have been inspired by things like that. It's a comment somebody's made in a conversation. It's an image on the news. And apart from anything, I just wanted to help myself and understand, that I try and process what I've just seen. So it's quite a personal thing in that sense. But I wrote this song and was trying to think, how do I do something like that sensitively as well? And I wrote a piano part that I then showed to my musical neighbour, and I sang the song, and it was the piano accompaniment that my neighbour zoned in on, because it was really bad. It was really bad. It was a very sort of plinky plonky, fairly monochrome, monotone, didn't change at all, no contrast. And the piano might as well have not been there, basically. The voice had, all the interest, and the piano was just in the background. And, he was making the point that if you've got 2 musicians, you should use 2 musicians. And it was literally just a phrase that he used that nudged me in a totally different direction, because up until that point, I had seen the melody instrument as probably the most important. And everything around it was, and I know this is really bad practice as a composer, but I would focus on that and write that first, and then everything else felt like it was kind of supporting that line. And so I looked at that piano part and I made it comment on the voice. I made them have a little conversation, so a little fragment of a tune in the voice would appear in the piano later, and it became much more tight-knit. And I felt that was the moment where I realised what you can do with a little. You can say a lot with a little. It can be a couple of notes. It can be a textural thing that you do between the piano and the voice, but sometimes these small little brush strokes are what make a really big impression on the listener. And it seems so obvious once I was told it, but you need that person to just nudge you in a certain direction. Have you thought about it? And it's not even like sitting down and playing you, saying, you know, why doesn't it sound like this? It's literally just saying, have a look at that part and just think, could it play a slightly different role? It's like highlighting something in a different colour, and suddenly everything else makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
It's something that you haven't heard, but was very important for me.
Yeah, how interesting, how insightful. And it's important to have that voice, just somebody, a second person, third person, just seeing things that you don't always see for yourself. But
Yeah,
your college is a champion of classical music and for quality, education. How hopeful are you that for the future of classical music being taught in schools?
I'm concerned. I'm not going to lie. I'm very concerned. I speak with so many people who all say the same thing, and there are so many wonderful initiatives and wonderful groups of people who are working really hard to try and make things happen. I feel like it's a case of joining the dots, because there are lots of wonderful initiatives that, you know, I've been lucky to be involved with. I mean, my first taste of writing for an orchestra was the fanfare competition with the Royal Opera House, and I was chosen to write this sort of 30-second piece that was recorded by the full orchestra and then used to call audience members to their seats throughout the season. So, I mean, where else would you have a piece of music recorded by the orchestra of the Royal Opera House and played 30 times in the year? It was, you know, it was a mad number of performances for a new piece of music, and I wouldn't have had that experience, and I wouldn't have even probably thought of writing for an orchestra. That was my first experience of doing it. Had I not entered that competition, I remember just seeing it advertised and thinking, why not? I didn't think it would go anywhere. But again, it was, you know, it was an outreach department of an opera house, and there are so many fantastic outreach initiatives, competitions, ensembles, you know, the Ivors Academy Youth Network, Music for Youth, which I'm an ambassador for as well. You know, they provide live performance opportunities to young people every year. It's like 60,000 young people every year. It's a huge scale. And there are so many wonderful things going on, but I feel like everybody's doing great things in their own pockets, and quite often it's beyond school. And I think the deeper challenge is actually the perception of music and the perception of the arts. Interesting to see what happens in the current situation in terms of support for, you know, arts organisations that are really struggling, because for a long time, very long time, it feels like music has always been seen as that nice add-on, nice to have.
Very much so.
It's not like science and maths. No. It's always sort of seen as, well, if we can do that, we will. If, you know, there's a big if. And I think certain in terms of, you know, I was very lucky. I went to a great state school that had, you know, they valued the arts. It was, you know, there were maybe a couple of music teachers, whereas there were maybe 25 sports teachers, 20 science teachers. So, you know, it wasn't on the scope of other subjects. And I think that balance needs to be redressed. But at least, you know, music was a part of school life, and we had a choir, we had a couple of pianos we could, you know, bash during the break time and see what sounds came out. And I think that the danger is that music becomes a thing that you only do after school if you can afford to do it. Yeah. It's not still a core part of the school day on a par with other subjects. It's sort of, it feels like a box ticking exercise, and you won't be held to account. You know, if you didn't deliver chemistry at school, you'd probably get quite a bad report quite quickly, and people would get very angry. I feel like it's easier to slip something under the radar if you're not providing a particularly strong, consistent music education. I think it's easier. It's almost like it's excused a little bit more, and I think there's a real danger with that, because that, you know, that's the broader perception of music, isn't it? The idea that, I mean, I remember some of my friends didn't realise I could study music at university. You know, they didn't realise there was such a thing as a music degree. And there's still this perception of music as a sort of optional extra that I think is really quite dangerous, because, as I say, you know, I wouldn't be lucky to work with orchestras if I hadn't have had that opportunity with an outreach department. But it is really important that you find opportunities within your school as well, and you don't have to always take the initiative to go to somebody else to get, to get those opportunities. There is an element of it needs to come to young people as well, and schools are struggling with a lot of challenges, and I'm not just saying let's throw money at music, but I do think that there are creative ways of bringing music into a curriculum. Even in the other subjects, music is not about music. You can help teach poetry or novels with music.
Maths, physics.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just being able to, and again, it goes down to breaking down those barriers, not just in terms of genre, but in terms of subjects. It's not science, maths, English, and then sort of on the other side of the school field, it's music and drama on a very small scale. It's a very important part of making a rounded human being in terms of understanding other people, being able to express yourself, socializing. Where else do you get 100 people on stage bowing and breathing at the same time or singing together? I think it's really important. A school is there to develop a well-rounded person, and music is a very important part of that, for sure.
Absolutely. Do you think it's important to go to university or a music college, or do you think there are alternative ways of getting your education?
If you'd have asked me that a few years ago, I would have said, got to go to university, And I'm always conscious that, my outlook's massively changed on this. I always, I loved reading and I loved studying at school, and I always wanted to go to university. I did start at university studying music, and then I left after 6 days.
Did you?
Because I felt, I was very well supported by the university, lovely people, great course. It wasn't a case of I felt like I couldn't write a certain way. I felt like I would be able to learn a great deal there. However, I became aware that there were opportunities coming my way as a composer that would require travelling and would require a great deal of time to work on an orchestral piece, for example. And it was interesting actually. In Freshers Week, I worked with an orchestra. I was up in Liverpool working on a piece with the orchestra, and I remember I'd already spent, I think, 3 days away from university, and I'd been there, not even a week. And I thought, I'm not spending all that money that I don't have to not be there. And it's not fair on my professors as well, who have a lot on their plate. If I'm a distracted student, it's not fair on either party. So I had a conversation with them and said I didn't think it was the right time for me. And they were very, very good at they gave me a year out, basically, and held my place for a year. So it wasn't like I was facing an abyss. So it's maybe not as daring as it might sound. But in that year, I travelled to America and worked with some songwriters. I had a couple of orchestral commissions and was able to travel to actually collaborate with the orchestra for that.
Amazing.
I felt that I needed that kind of freedom at this point in my life to just try things out and meet different people and see where it goes. So I very much advocate the university is great, but it's not the only route.
No.
There are many ways to get an education, and there are many times to get an education. You don't have to be 18, just out of school, going straight to university. And I think that there is a lot of pressure on a lot of people my age to go straight to university, and there's the whole dropout. The connotations of the phrase dropout. But some of the great musicians I admire never went to university. I mean, J.S. Bach never went to university. And I think that it's a fairly recent idea, like 1800s onwards, that you've got to go to university, and that's the accepted route. But education comes in many forms and at many different times in your life. So I would say it's a great route, but it's not the only one.
Great. Yeah, interesting. I mean, your education has come through all of the commissions and all the opportunities that you've had, you've learned along the way, which is amazing, really, really amazing.
Yeah, and I've been very lucky. And again, it's other people that have helped somebody, develop. It's the Royal Opera House with their outreach department, the fanfare. it's the radio person that I went over and said hello with. They could have just told me to go away, but they didn't. They had a conversation with me and were very encouraging. And I think that's for any kind of young musicians watching. That would be my kind of message as well, is that people are really approachable. Like musicians, it is a community. Like, we're not just doing it because we want to sit in a room and self-satisfied. We want to share things with people, and it's a conversation. And so don't be afraid of emailing somebody or sending a message, because nobody gets anywhere without some help. And I've been very lucky to have those kind of outreach departments of orchestras and conductors and composers and broadcasters who have just been really good with giving some time. You just have a coffee and ask for some advice, or now I have the luxury of doing it in an interview, so I can just ask the questions for my show, which is a great luxury. Don't be afraid of contacting somebody, because nobody gets to where they are without other people to help them, and I'm very grateful to them for that, because they don't have to do it.
Yes, just fabulous to hear from you, Jack. Wesley might want to have a word.
Yeah,
I've learned so many insights from you today, Jack. More and more. Speak.
It's been really fascinating, Jack, to hear about your thoughts about the curriculum and curriculum development and other projects, education projects that you've been involved with. Thank you very much indeed, and to you, Shirley, as well. And we will come back to have a little further discussion with our Q&A, because I see I have a question or two with me already. But I just want to step in at this moment to plug our own Ivors Academy Youth Network and our Youth Network Council. For those who are new to our Youth Network Presents webinar series, I want to give you a quick explanation about what the Ivors Academy Network is all about. The Ivors Academy Youth Network is our new initiative to engage the UK's community of young creators with events and musical industry advice. The network is the facilitator to connect with young creators working in various musical genres, and to build a strong network. Through our Youth Network Council, which is made up of young creator reps, there is a direct opportunity for young creators to express their unique concerns and experiences of starting out in our industry, and to have a voice and have their voice listened to and heard right at the top level of the Ivors Academy at board level. One of the Youth Network's key support organisations is the Ivors Academy Trust. The Trust underpins our Youth Network programme of events and projects, and helps us to engage with and support a wide range of emerging young creators. The Trust is also instrumental in assisting with issues of access to Youth Network and other learning initiatives by the Ivors Academy, by offering bursaries for educational engagements to help remove the financial barriers to participation. The Ivors Academy Trust helps the Ivors Academy truly become an inclusive creator community. If anyone who's listening wants to join the Youth Network as an individual, partner or affiliate organisation, please do drop me a line at wesley@ivorsacademy.com. Right, now I want to open out to some questions. I have a question from Dennis Connolly. He says, and I'll try to condense what he's just said actually, is that he is 64 and he's just taking up writing music, composing, and making a start. He wonders, do you think that his age and no track record would put off approaching publishers, management companies, and other bits of the music industry? Jack, Shirley?
Jack, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I do, I say this with, it's a difficult one, because there are great opportunities for young composers, and I do think there's a lot of work to be done for actually saying it's composers, full stop. Mm-hmm. I said earlier on about, are you aspiring or not? Aspiring often equals, it seems, people think, you must be a student, you must be young, and I don't like that label at all anyway. And I think you're a composer if you're writing music, as I said earlier on. Yes. And I think, there's a good example. So the South Bank Centre did these, they did a sort of composers weekend, Composers Collective it's called, and I think they aim to do it every year, but it was a free to access composers like marathon weekend where they had lots of different chats with publishers, with agents, with composers, with performers, and anybody could go. And you had, you know, Esther Salonen, Unsukchin, rubbing shoulders with, you know, me, and, you know, another young composer. And, you know, I remember sitting next to a lady who was in her late 70s, and she says she's literally in the last couple of years just started composing. It was helping her process things that were going on in her life. She never have thought she would take to it, but she really wants to pursue it. And you know, I don't think age should be a problem. And I do think with, you know, when we talk about diversity, we should be talking about age as well. And that applies to young people, and that also applies to older people. I think there's more work to be done as far as that's concerned, definitely.
Agreed, agreed.
Which probably isn't very helpful, is it? It sounds very optimistic. Sorry, Dennis.
I think that's absolutely fantastic answer. I mean, within our equality, diversity and inclusion, you know, agenda at the Ivors Academy, we look to, you know, encourage the young creators like yourself, but also support older creators. The whole spectrum offers a lot of learning between, you know, passing between both older creators and young creators, and vice versa. It's this flow of information and experience.
Yeah, I think the best thing as well, Dennis, is to actually just contact people directly and say exactly what you've said, and you know, lay out where you are, what you're writing, and why you've come to it at all. Because I think when people hear a personal story, it sounds odd, but I think, you know, it's interesting to see our faces when that question was posed, as well. When I said about the lady at South Bank Centre in her late 70s who was composing, we all looked surprised. But why? You know, we shouldn't be surprised. And look at the number of great pieces that have been written by, you know, Vaughan Williams, Janacek, who were writing into their 80s, their 70s, 80s. So, you know, age shouldn't be an issue. But I think the best thing to do is to contact somebody you admire, whether it's a conductor or a publisher. And, you know, you can frame it as you're just asking for advice, but lay out your position and don't be afraid of having that conversation, because people shouldn't look surprised. Sorry.
No, Shirley.
Captain Tom is my role model, 100 years old.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
Say no more, say no more. Captain Tom.
I have 3 more questions from Cara Purvis, the first one. Jack, this is to Jack. Yeah. What have been your highlights of working at Skylar Radio, and how did you get into radio work?
Wow! Oh, there's a novel in this. So it's I'm not just saying this. I haven't been asked to say it. It's a dream job because you know, composing is for a time quite solitary. You are sat in a room with a piece of paper writing the notes, and it really needs that. And there is the collaborative element, but it tends to be like the day before the performance when you bring it to an orchestra and you do the rehearsal. Whereas radio is sociable from day one. You're in a studio, you know, I've got people like Shirley coming in and saying hello, and we're able to meet and have a conversation. And it's the perfect sort of complement. So, you know, I'm very lucky to be able to do that and have that balance. How did I get into it? I went to see a show in London for it was the Play That Goes Wrong. I remember it very well, and it was for a big birthday for a relative, and we'd treated ourselves to go to London. And you know, up until this point, I was probably 16, 17. I didn't go to many live concerts. I hadn't seen many. You know, I could probably count on 2 hands the number of concerts I'd been to. I didn't see that much live music. And I just remember walking across the bridge and seeing a BBC logo, actually, by the South Bank Centre, and I saw the outside broadcast trucks, and I was just intrigued. I just saw lots of people and lots of trucks, and thought I'd really like to see what's going on. And they had a pop-up studio in the foyer of the South Bank Centre, and they were doing some live podcasts for 2 weeks from the concert hall, and you could see the presenters. They had a glass box studio, so you could see all the tech, you could see the producers. And I remember just suddenly, you know, visually looking at it, thinking, this is amazing. I've never thought about this before. I heard it, I listened to a lot of different music and I listened to a lot of different radio. But it was really nice to be able to actually see the human face behind it. And, you know, I try and do the same thing with the show, The Culture Bunker. I talk about the people behind the music, because I think that's a really important way of understanding that piece and what they're trying to say. But that was my introduction to radio, was seeing a live broadcast and then introducing myself. I went over and said hello. It was there that I saw the boss of that station, and I met some producers and presenters, and we stayed in touch. You know, I was just asking for advice, really. And it transpired when I came out of university. I dropped a line to the people that I had met a few years before to say, I'm not at university, and you know, I've done these commissions and it'd be great to catch up. And as a result of those conversations, I was commissioned to do a pilot with the BBC. So I ended up, before I worked with Scala, developing some ideas with other broadcasters. So, you know, it was quite fast moving in that sense, but it was, again, all through conversations and through sharing ideas with different people and being lucky enough to be encouraged by these people to try things out. But, you know, the highlight at Scala, so we launched last March, so we're a new station, and, you know, the idea is come as you are classical music. So, you know, you don't have to look or sound a certain way, and there's plenty of music that falls in the grey areas between, you know, these labels that we've imposed on music that, you know, maybe previously didn't really have a home, because it draws on lots of different genres. And so, you know, we will be able to play an orchestral version of a pop song. We'll be able to play, you know, some top film music. We have David Arnold, who I know he's done some sessions with the Ivors Academy recently. You know, he did a special series for us on the music of the James Bond series, and he literally went from Doctor No to the modern day. And you know, we've got a weekly video game music show as well, and you'll hear video game music throughout the week, as well as the classical masterpieces that we know, love, and expect. So, you know, there's a real freedom with Scala, and that's one of my highlights for me. You know, I'm lucky I get to choose the music for my show, and that's virtually unheard of on national radio, you know, to be able to have that freedom to handpick and curate. But, you know, we're lucky that at Scala we've got a video games composer. We had William Orbit, Madonna's producer, doing a special series for us. You know, we've had all sorts of people from lots of different backgrounds, and it's nice to be able for them to have the freedom to say this is something that's special to me and I want to share it with you. So the ability to curate and pick your own music and share that is you know, is very valuable and important. In terms of a highlight for me, I was very lucky to go to New York last June for the Tony Awards. We did a special for my show from New York, and I was so privileged to, you know, meet lots of different singers, composers, writers, to see the shows, bearing in mind, again, at that point, I really hadn't seen many live musicals, and suddenly, over a week, we saw a lot of live shows, met a lot of great people, went behind the scenes at the theatres. That was such an inspiring, you know, opportunity for me. And again, I think it's important to stress it was very visual. You know, how did I get into radio? I saw something that looked really exciting. I saw an outside broadcast track. And, you know, why am I really interested in theatre, and particularly in the last few years? I think because the more I've seen shows and the more I've met people who are already doing it, the more I thought, oh, interesting, I'd like to try that out. But, you know, it sort of comes back to the music education point. You need to see somebody doing it already. You need that person to look to then go and do it yourself. But sorry, that was a very long-winded answer to a simple question.
No,
I think that answers it. Yeah.
Another question from Jasper. What have you been listening today? What recording would you recommend to check out? For both of you.
Wow.
Shirley, do you want to go first?
Shirley,
Gosh.
you go first.
Oh my gosh. I've been listening to Jennifer Higdon's work, orchestral work, and chamber works most recently. So I would suggest listening to any of her works.
Okay. Very nice, Jack.
I've been listening. Well, there are two actually. If you love all things orchestra, there's an album called, maybe a bit of a curveball, you might not be expecting this, but it's Classic Julie, Classic Broadway. It's Julie Andrews with a full symphony orchestra, and the arrangements are so lush. It's the most colourful recording, and I listen to it again and again, not only because the songwriters behind them, there's a lot of Rodgers and Hammerstein on there. You know, it's deceptively simple. You listen to some of those melodies and you think, you know, it kind of sounds like it's existed for centuries. and yet it's, you know, it's been written for a very specific purpose and you know, a specific character, and so that's an album number one, not just for the composing but also for the orchestra. Amazing. And then there's one other which is Nat King Cole, who I just love as a singer, singer. He does duets with George Shearing. It's called Nat King Cole Plays, Nat King Cole Sings, Shearing Plays, and it's a series of duets. And again, the master of understatement, both of them. The maximum effect from the seemingly sort of minimum effort, and, you know, very transparent, very, very classy recordings. So those would be my two recommended ones.
Fantastic, thank you both. A final question from Charlotte Eve. How did you get into writing songs for popular artists, and how does it compare to your classical work?
Great question.
Oh, okay. So
I would do that, yeah.
Well, I listen to loads of genres, and I think we kind of listen by mood now. We don't say, you know, today I'm wearing my classical hat and tomorrow I listen to pop. Like, if you look at my Spotify playlist, it's very diverse, and I think that's how we all listen to music. So I you know, when I started composing, I was writing songs alongside pieces for a string quartet or piano, and it was, you know, they're sort of side by side. But the pop songwriting was, again, I'd contacted a pop songwriter I admired, who I knew had moved. They'd gone one step further. I was thinking about leaving university at this point. They had left their home in New Zealand to come to London as a teenager to pursue their songwriting career. So I contacted this person, knowing a bit about their story, to ask for their advice. They were really good. They responded very quickly, and you know, very balanced on both sides. But basically, they said, if you decide to leave university, this is in a very short space of time, remember, but they were really generous. If you decide to leave university, you know, maybe consider coming to LA and saying hello. So that was my first port of call when I left university. It was, okay, some of the money that I would have spent on university, I'm going to put towards, you know, flights, which are not cheap, to LA. And, you know, that was, I attended a songwriting camp with that songwriter in Palm Springs, and then spent a week in LA, basically deciding my schedule in the sort of weeks leading up to it, contacting people and saying, you know, I was going to be in town. I'd love if you had 5 minutes to meet for a coffee. I would love to sort of pick your brains about this whole songwriting business. So we sort of, I travelled to a faraway city and said I would make something happen and just meet people and see what happens. So that sounds, again, very odd, but again, it's being confident to, you know, contact people, and you know, what's the worst that can happen? They don't reply.
Exactly.
And really, people like it. You know, it's I suppose it's enthusiasm. So don't be afraid of contacting people. And, you know, we're very lucky. We live in a world where most people are very contactable. So you know, don't be afraid of getting in touch with people you admire, really.
Well, not to put you on the spot, Jack, but I've had a response from Dennis, who asked that first question, and he says, would a wannabe composer of a certain age be a subject for your show? If so, I'd love to be involved.
Oh, well, you see, the thing is, you know, and I'm very much a believer of, like, none of us are in an ivory tower, whether we're a composer or a radio broadcaster. I like to know what's going on. So seriously, you know, if people are working on a particular project, or there's music you want me to hear, like, you know, musicians like to hear from other musicians and hear what other people are working on. As I said earlier on, we're all kind of like sponges, aren't we? So it's, you know, it fires me up as a creative to know what other people are doing. So yeah, I think I don't know whether the Ivors, I think there's a link to my show.
There is, yeah.
There's a little contact thing on that link.
Do contact Jack, Dennis, on that link.
Yeah. I get, it's nice. I get quite a lot of sort of, you know, music sent in from, you know, composers from all over the place, and it's, you know, it's never trouble. It's nice to hear what people are up to. So yeah, follow that link, and there should be something at the bottom, Dennis.
Brilliant. Shirley, well, a question to both of you, from me actually. what's your current project or future projects for you? What are you working on?
Well, I'm working on an opera. Well, it's developing my opera, Women of the Windrush, but it's now the Windrush story. So it's making it into an epic piece.
Yes.
So that's what I'm working on.
Fantastic. And Jack?
Well, I'm quietly working away on a theatre piece because it's been a sort of an ambition of mine that when I get some free time, I want to work on a specific theatre piece. So there's been quite a bit of songwriting recently. There's also an orchestral commission for an orchestra in America. Actually, I've been working on a orchestra. So there's a nice balance. You know, you can go from an orchestral dimension to the sort of, you know, this theatre piece is piano only score. And a small number of singers, so it's very intimate, and I like being able to sort of go between those different forces, you know, literally in the space of a day or two. They inspire each other. I find that is good.
Yes,
Sure.
Great, Jack. Yeah, I should also say that I'm working on a piece for Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra's Resound. At the celebrating the independent living movement 60-year celebration.
Right, yes. Fantastic. Well, I look forward to all those projects coming to fruition. Great. I've just been told, unfortunately, by the powers that be, that we have to wrap things up. It's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful and inspiring conversation from both Jack and from Shirley. Wow, it's been really fantastic. Thank you both. I would like to thank Jack Pepper and Dr. Shirley Thompson OBE for giving up their time this afternoon, and I thank the audience for joining us. A huge thank you also goes to my Ivors Academy colleague Tarek, who's helping out behind the scenes with all the stuff.
There he is.
I hope you've enjoyed the conversation this afternoon, and I hope you join us for our next Youth Network Presents webinar event. That will be advertised very shortly. Just also to let you know that the Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter and Ivors Academy Songwriter Committee member, Lady V, will be hosting her next coffee morning session tomorrow morning with D. Adam, Mike Compass, and Larry Hibbett. Listen in tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much, and see you again soon. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Shirley. Bye, guys.
Tarek.